What happens when that autonomous agent you gave standing access to orders 1,000 pizzas? Good morning, everybody. This is John Martinez, technical evangelist at Delinea, and this is the Grounds for Access podcast. I'm joined today by Rohit Agnihotri. Welcome, Rohit. How are you today?
Thank you, John. I'm very well. Thank you for having me on the show.
So, a little bit later on, I want to talk about the identity uncertainty principle. I definitely want to
Absolutely.
stab that one. Let's get that one right up front because I absolutely love that. So welcome today. Rohit is the VP of Identity and Access Management at Northwestern Mutual, I believe, right?
Northwestern Mutual, yeah.
Awesome. I got that right. And he's been in IM for a very long time, much longer than I have. So I'm very excited to have you today, Rohit, on our podcast, on our introductory podcast. So thank you again for coming on. So Rohit, tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of what you do and what's a day in the life of Rohit, and most importantly, because this is the Grounds for Access podcast. We do believe in drinking coffee, tea, etc. What's in your cup?
I am glad that you asked, John. And first of all, thank you for having me. I know that you are rebooting this podcast. I've heard some of your older ones, so congratulations, and I wish you a
Awesome.
lot
Thank
of
you.
success.
Thank you.
Uh, in my cup today, there fortunately isn't any coffee because I already have as many jitters, and especially working in IM
I
for
get
such
that
a
for sure.
long time. Yeah, I have a bit of paranoia now. So I have now on this new kick. My wife actually introduced me to the coconut water. I
Oh,
absolutely
nice,
love it. It's very
nice,
refreshing during the day. So yeah, that is what
nice,
is in my cup.
nice. I love that. I absolutely love that. So tell us, Rohit, about your time as an identity leader. What's that like? Give us a little bit of the background view of a day in the life of number one. You Rohit, right? And and I'll just preface this part of the discussion with a little bit. I listened to a 2-year-old podcast that you mentioned in your LinkedIn, and I really loved your cold open back then, which was, "Hey, everybody, be kind to yourself, believe in yourself," right? So
Yeah.
I absolutely love that aspect of it because I'm a huge believer in that, right? I
Mm.
absolutely. I remind myself, well, not maybe every day, but I try to remind myself about being kind to myself, right? I think we're,
That's nice.
talking about paranoia, too much coffee and all that stuff.
Yeah.
It's a thing that those of us that are in this business, right, especially on the practitioner side, right, which I've been, right, we can definitely let that bog us down in the daily life of reaction to incidents, or something else broke, or we got breached, stuff like that. So tell us a little bit from your seat, like what it's like to be an identity security leader in large organizations like you've been.
It's pretty awesome, John. I can send emails like "please fix," right? So
I love that. I love
yeah,
that.
I was in consulting for the longest time, and the partners used to send me emails like "please fix RA, please fix DL." I was like, I would do it when I become the leader, so I do it
Right.
now as well. But but it's a very interesting field to be in, and especially in the seat that I am. I feel I feel a lot of gratitude, and I'm not just saying this for the sake of saying this, but I really feel that there are a couple of things, right? A, I get to lead a very, very good and an awesome team. Leading people is definitely something that I really enjoy. But most importantly, identity is something that is based in first principle, right? So even though my job doesn't require me to be
Right.
hands on every day,
Right.
but I can
Right.
still, break down the problem into simple things that I can
Right.
understand from my vantage point,
Right.
right? So I really love that aspect of it. And then sometimes a technologist in a bigger organization, especially when you are in the industry, you might feel like you are like a back office, or you have been sidelined where the business takes front and
Mhm.
center.
Mhm.
And identity is something that business understands, business cares about. They have to deal with the identity leaders. So identity leaders actually interact so much with the business leader
Right.
that I do
Right.
not see myself as a technical leader anymore. I am part of, like, no, more or less I'm a business leader who also has a technical or engineering team to learn. So all these aspects, being business leader, being able to understand my space, because everything in identity is based on first principle, leading principle. I think that's pretty interesting. Obviously, there is a lot of chaos that happens, John, but that is just part of the job.
Of course, that comes with it. And I think one aspect of it, right, and as part of my day job, I talk to a lot of identity leaders, a lot of identity practitioners, right? And it's still a mix, from what I hear out there, in the sense that some identity teams are kind of like, I was a sysadmin, many years ago, right? And I remember that identity security grew out of the IT organization, right? But I think a few major incidents about 15-20 years ago, like a lot of that mind shift happened. But I still see some organizations, where identity is it an IT organization? Is it a security organization? Organizationally, where does it report? How does that even change the sort of the operations, if you will, of identity security, right? Being in IT versus being in a security team, as an example, right? Number one, how do you view it? And what are the differences of those two reporting
Yeah.
structures?
Absolutely. Honestly, there isn't
Hmm.
much, right? You
Hmm.
can call it water, you can call it H2O, you can call it
Yeah.
aqua. That doesn't
Yeah.
change the nature
Yeah.
of the
Right.
water itself, right?
Right.
It
Right.
doesn't change the nature of the work, whether I'm
Yeah.
reporting to the CISO, whether I'm reporting to the CIO, whether I'm reporting to the head of infrastructure,
Hmm.
right? I still need to have that same balance. My part is my job is to look after user experience, to
Hmm.
make sure
Hmm.
security is in place, to make sure business is getting it at the space
Yeah.
speed that business wants.
Yeah.
So all of these factors remain consistent.
Hmm.
Now, how does it change? Is like, managing up is an art. It just doesn't matter if you're reporting to a CIO or a CISO or somebody else. It also
Hmm.
depends upon, you might report to one CISO who is very different, very technology or technology focused. You might report to another CISO who is very business focused.
Hmm.
So it's all the art of managing up and
Right.
then managing down itself, right? Like if I get reorganized today, I will still continue to manage in the way that I do. So I think identity leaders specifically have to find that balance for themselves, and irrespective of where they sit in the organization, they have to find that balance between security, usability, and
Right.
business velocity, and
Right.
then just learn the art of managing up.
Right. I like what you mentioned a little bit earlier about, at the end of the day, your role is more of a business role. So, and I did catch this in one of your podcast episodes, right? Is the aspect of making sure that the business leaders, your board of directors, let's say, right, is bought into, the whole aspect of securing identities within an organization, right? And you talk about that, and it's important. And at the end of the day, 100% of the users of an organization use your service, right? Everybody logs in,
Mhm.
100%, right? So
Yeah.
talk to us a little bit about that. How important is it for having your business leadership bought into, your role and your team's role within the function of the organization?
Yeah, absolutely. So we cannot succeed unless you have a buy-in and a great relationship with those business leaders. So you absolutely have to make it happen. And to have a great relationship, there are like every relationship, it needs work, right? It needs work. Like you have to stop talking in terms of verified ID or technical constructs or just in time or GSPs, which you and I both know are super important,
Yeah.
but they don't care about it, right? So we
Yeah.
have to speak to them in the language that they understand. And second thing that I really believe in is trust is not built during the crisis. When there
Hmm.
is an outage, they aren't going to trust me. So I have to go out there and build those relationships and try to understand their pain point. And at the end of the day, John, you, I, all of us at the workplace are trying to do the best that we can. Are in it for the right reasons and then just want to shut down and go back and spend time with our families. People are people, right? They don't have a bad streak with them. If you speak to them in a rational manner, they would do it, right? Because our customers today are very security aware as well. They are asking for security. Like, for example, would you ever put your money in a bank that does not have a secure MFA? No,
Yeah.
right? And that is why the
Yeah.
business leader who owns the website on the bank is very aware of MFA. It's just that we have to meet them where they are. And most importantly, and I think this is where some identity leaders make this a mistake. They believe like identity is is important and all important
Mhm.
thing. And that's not
Yep.
it, right? Business is not in the business of identity and access management. An insurance company wants to sell insurance. A retail company wants to sell more product, right? And identity is a part of it, like platform is a part of it, or any other technology team is a part of it. So we need to understand that. We need to understand risk and risk acceptance and risk tolerance and all of those things and have that conversation with business. You cannot just come in and say, this is what identity team wants. Who cares,
Yeah.
man? Right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's all about the business. It's all about the
Right.
bottom line and doing right by our customers.
Absolutely. Although I will say, as both obviously as a consumer of insurance products,
Mhm.
right? I have
Yeah.
insurance so for stuff,
Yeah.
house and cars and all that stuff. And I think this is more just me being a security nerd more than anything, right? It's just like I appreciate when my insurance company a few years ago sent an email out and said, "Hey, we're turning on MFA for all of your stuff," and I'm like, okay, that makes me feel. But I'm sure I'm not. I'm not the norm, right? Most people are like, oh my God, now what? What do I need to do? And it's what a hassle, right?
That's absolutely fair, and it is so fair. It's such a big responsibility. But
Right.
from my perspective, John, and especially working for a company which is 160, years old, it does put a lot of responsibility on me as well, right?
Yeah.
Like, why
Yeah.
does my company exist? My company exists for, and I'm simplifying it. I'm not the CEO or the board of directors, but my company exists for two basic reasons. A,
Hmm.
to provide financial security to the Americans today,
Hmm.
and be
Hmm.
relevant enough so that we can be existing in the next 40 years, because you are putting in your money, hopefully you will not need for the next 40 years.
Right.
So you
Right.
are trusting in us that we would be here for the next 40 years, hopefully for the next 160 years. So that puts a big responsibility on me, because trust is built over time, right? So
Yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely.
But I completely agree. This is just something that we continue doing it. Sometimes the user base is very security aware and it becomes easier for them to adopt it. Sometimes we have to coach them through it, and that is a part of job.
A little bit of a switch here on your experience. I see that you've been obviously a practitioner before, you've been a developer before. What have all of those experiences taught you about where you are today? Especially for those that are watching us today and are thinking of like, hey, I would like to become at some point a VP of IAM. What has being a practitioner taught you now that you're a leader?
Absolutely. So my only piece of advice, and it is not going to be a super insightful Buddha level advice, but my only piece of advice would be everybody's job is difficult, right? Just
Mhm.
understand that, and
Right.
and I've got this respect because of different vantage points that I've had as an a product developer, as an implementation engineer, as a support engineer, then a mid-level manager, and now the VP of this company. uh, Everybody's job is difficult, right? So when somebody comes to me and says, "Hey, onboard this application, this is just a connector," I know there is nothing like just a connector, right? Or when somebody comes to me and say, "Switch on just in time," I know
Yeah,
there
yeah.
is nothing called as switch on just in time access. So I have a lot of respect. I do believe things are not just like uh, binary, and it just nothing is just a something. So that does give me a leg up, because I have a lot of respect for people who are in the weeds, who are in the messy middle, and I need to give them the respect and the bandwidth so that they can do their job.
Let's switch topics completely. The elephant in the room here is AI, right? We can't go 5 minutes without talking about AI. And that's, you
Absolutely.
know, we were talking a little bit earlier, right? AI is here to stay, right? It's a reality of our life today. Um, and in the contrast, or not in the contrast, but AI shown against the identity uncertainty principle, and we can get into what that means, right? So for the audience, right, I'd love for you to explain what that means. But there's a lot of uncertainty, obviously, right? AI agents are there's a lot of trust in their inference models, right? And we actually, I've used Claude Code. I've had it generate code for me. I've had to do things that, yeah, this is great. Go ahead and do it, right? But there's a lot of uncertainty there on how it's going to react. I mean, there's recent incidents, right, with OpenAI, Hugging Face, right? It's just like,
Yeah.
hey, it hacked me, right? It's like,
Hmm.
but here's the great reason for it, right? And here's why that's a good thing, right? There's a lot of uncertainty there, right? And so with that contrast of the identity uncertainty principle in AI, let's kind of delve into the AI topic, talking about that. I don't know if you want to introduce us to the identity uncertainty principle first, and then kind of go into AI from there, or what
Yeah.
do you think? What does Rohit think?
Absolutely, absolutely. So simply put, AI is here to stay, and we all have to adopt to it, right? Like people like you and me, John, without aging ourselves too much, we are not AI native, so
Right,
we'll have to skill up. The younger
right.
generation that is going to come up will going to be AI native, right? I'm glad Gen X or whatever they are called now, Gen Z,
Gen
they were all
Z,
digital
yeah.
natives, so they were showing
I've,
us, right?
I've
Like,
got
hey,
two
yeah,
Gen Z kids. Yeah, absolutely.
exactly. Yeah. So the Gen Z kids were showing us every day, and now the next
Yep.
Gen Alpha, who is going to be AI native, is going to show them something as well. But yeah, AI is here to stay. There is going to be no company of the future which is not using AI. That company will not exist. But in the next 2 or 3 years, or at least 4 years, there would be two type of companies that would emerge. One of the companies would be using AI the right way, and the other companies would be using AI the wrong way, and it would be very clear and apparent. And this is where I think identity uncertainty principle comes in, because what I've tried to do with while crafting this is we cannot use the same old models to define the agentic AI as an identity. What that means is, let's say, if you are into the privileged access management space and you are thinking about vault everything, you will never come to a concept of just in time. Sometimes you have to stop doing the old to start doing something new, right? You cannot put agentic AI in the same category as human AI, right? So now my thesis or the identity uncertainty principle is very simple. As the autonomy of the agent increases, the certainty of its identity decreases, right? So the more you are increasing the autonomy of the agent, the certainty of whether it is the same agent is actually decaying, right? Because see, human beings like you and me, our identity evolves over many years, right?
Hmm.
I'm pretty sure, John, which the John that logged in at 9 o'clock was the same John that was in there at 9:05,
Right,
right?
right.
And it is not just
Definitely
because of
different,
biological exactly.
for
and
sure.
and it yeah and it is not just because of the biological reasons, right? But you have like employment contracts, and you have like this moral compass, and you have this social fabric that you have to adhere to. So human identities changes very slowly, right? The same thing with service accounts today. What it does, it's going to exactly do the same thing tomorrow, because at the end of
Right,
the day, this is a script. And then we
right,
created this new class of entity, and change is the nature of that class. Like you are telling this AI agent that go out, learn, and find new and innovative way of doing it. So change is its core behavior. And the difference between this change and the change that human goes through is it changes at machine speed that we cannot comprehend, right? So I'm saying it is taking decisions, it is learning, it is adopting, it is changing. So as it is changing at the rate or the inverse rate of how much the autonomy is increasing. And to keep that as constant, right, you have to measure the frequency or behavioral change at the same rate at which it is changing. So this is basically in simple language what the identity and certainty principle
right,
is, so
right.
that our agents are autonomous with what we are comfortable with.
Yeah. And yeah, you have to adapt to that evolution of these agents, right? Because they're going to
100%.
be trying more stuff. So and I'm glad you brought up, you preempted my next question, right? Which was a little bit around the difference between AI agents and service accounts, and machine identities using those service accounts, right? Those are more deterministic, obviously, right? And I love the way you said it. A script is going to do the same thing today that it did yesterday. Yeah, unless you modified it, right? As an engineer modified
100%.
it to do
Yep.
something else, right? Uh, but yeah, we got into agentic identity security at the beginning, thinking of it in terms of non-human identities, right? It technically is a non-human identity, or is it a hybrid? Is it a composite identity where the human kind of kickstarts the agent and then it goes and does its own thing? And does that spawn a new identity? Like, how do you think about that, right? Because it's I know this is the uncertainty principle, but like, how do you think about that? How do identities evolve, and how do we adapt to that world?
Yeah, absolutely. And there is so much to unpack. So, such a
Yeah,
loaded question and such a
yeah,
great question there, John,
yeah.
honestly, right? But just breaking it down, right? So, we are thinking about agentic security as it is just a one thing, right? So, in comparison, what is human security, right?
Right,
No,
right,
dude, there is no one thing as human security.
right,
You have
right,
your WAPs and network firewall, you have your
right.
MFA, and then you have
Yeah.
your email security, and you have a step up authentication. So, it's a bunch or a host of products, right? It's a suite of products. And similarly, anybody claiming that they are doing agentic security, they are doing a part of it, but they are not truly doing agentic security, because there is nothing like human security per se.
Right,
And the
right.
second thing that it comes down to is it a part of non-human identity? So non-human identity, or NHIM, I struggle with this term a lot because of few reasons. It is a great instrument to get buy-in. Like, my team can come in and say, "Hey, Rohit, I need funding for non-human identity initiative." Like, yeah, that's cool. Everybody's talking about it. So it's a good tool, right? But but this is a concept, right? And you cannot create architecture or engineering decisions based upon a concept. It has to be based upon an architecture. And what we are doing is we are talking about non-human identity as it is it an architecture, and it is not, because the service account is very different from an agent, is very different from an API key, is very
Mhm.
different from an OAuth token,
Yeah.
right? So at our level, right, or at least my level, it's a great instrument to get buy-in, to have a conversations without getting too much into the weeds. But
Hmm.
non-human identity as an architectural concept is bad, right? AI agents could be termed as a non-human or a type of non-human identity, but then you have to understand that every type of this identity is different. Another problem that I have with this, John, is,
Hmm.
let's say I open a shop where I treat animals, right? Should I call it non-dog non-dog animal treatment center, right?
Right,
That
right.
means I will treat both goldfish and lion, and I'm pretty sure treating goldfish and lion are two very different skills, right? So
Yeah, for
think
sure.
about how we think about identity. We think about workforce identity. It is something. We think about privileged access management. It is something. And now we are saying non-human identity. So we created a circle around the humans and said everything outside of it is non-human identity. And that is
Right.
where I struggle with in architectural
That's where,
concepts.
yeah, that's where it kind of like, yeah. No, great points. I love that. So this is the next step. Is going to be the process purgatory. So let's go.
Yeah, process purgatory. Yes. And
Yeah.
before that, John, if you don't mind, I
Yeah.
think we were on the topic of this AI agents, and I think there is so much confusion around what an agent truly is. So,
Hmm.
by this channel or by this medium,
Yeah.
I would like to like test out this
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
I look at this AI
Yeah.
agent,
Yeah.
it's a part of three things. Like, these are three things that makes an agent. So
Hmm.
there is this LLM, which is called the brain,
Hmm.
and then there is this context, or which we call the memory, and then there is the tools, which we called as the hands, right? And these are the three components. When they come together, it
Yep.
creates an agent. You
Yep.
take out any one component and it is not an agent anymore. Let's say you take out hands or the
Yep.
tools that it connects to, right?
Yep.
So it is now just a chatbot. It is
Yeah.
not an agent. That is why
Right.
chat GPT is not an agent.
Right.
If you, let's say, take out the brain, you take out the
Yeah.
LLM,
Yeah.
so now
Yep.
it has the context and it has the hands or the tools. It just becomes an automation script. So that is why, brain plus memory plus hands, this is what makes an agent, and all of us needs to be aware of it.
And that's a great way to I think look at agents, right? Because I one analogy I've heard for chatbots is it's like a very well spoken parrot, right? This is basically it sounds human even, right? And but it really is just kind of parroting back. No, I love that. And I think one aspect of these agents, right? Especially once we get into the autonomous world, right? The agents are out there because we've commissioned them to, right? We've commissioned them to go out and do these tasks on my behalf, on our behalf, as an organization, as a team, etc. Right? Do these things, right? Um, and they're out there and they're inferring, they're learning, they're adding to knowledge, right? And they're learning how to do the tasks that you want them to do in a more efficient way. You know, it's like we talked about earlier. They're no longer deterministic, right? It's not a script that goes, you know, from top down and it does exactly all of the things that I tell it to do, right? We allow it to learn and do things better or do things a little bit different. There's not a it's like when you prompt, you know, ChatGPT to create for you an image, you know, a lot of people get frustrated, as do I, right? It's like it didn't create the same image the next time. I just want you to edit this little piece, but now you gave me a whole new thing. Right? And so it's like that aspect of it, right? Is like that non-deterministic part, right? Now that you've explained to us, you know, how you view an agent, right, and the parts of it, like the brain aspect of it. Um, is that is that is that the or better asked, right? As identity security people, how do we adapt to that? You know, how do we think about securing the identities that these AI agents use, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. So first of all, we'll have to get rid of old constructs here. Like we cannot think about agentic security in the same vein or in the same lane as we thought about human security. These are new concepts, and we'll just have to be comfortable with it. But to answer your question very directly, John, right? Like as you mentioned, this is non-deterministic by nature. You can provide it the same input twice, and it will give you two different outputs,
Mm-hmm.
right? It creates its own path. So uh, you would see it logging into applications which you haven't thought about just because it is the right thing to do. So you have
Mm-hmm.
to be you have to be comfortable with that, right? Of how you create your policies. But a couple of things that definitely should stand out when you are securing your AI agents is definitely think about the delegation chain model, and not in a theoretical concept, but think about how can you add the identity data in your
Mm-hmm.
observability tool.
Mm-hmm.
So that's number one. Second,
Mm-hmm.
there are great RFCs out there like RFC 8693, in which this is about token exchange,
Yeah.
in which when the token is exchanged you can use claims like act claim so that you know where it came from and where it is going. So definitely there are some development constructs that you could use so
Mm-hmm.
that A, you have the observability data, and B, you also have this RFC 8693, so you can create a delegated chain. Second thing is think about the fidelity as well. Fidelity in terms of what was the intent and what is the true behavior, and not in a sort of I will look into the logs and find it out. This has to be done during the runtime itself,
Right.
because that is the
Yep.
difference between an autopsy and a pulse, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
right. And that is why attestation is not logging, right?
Right.
Irrespective of what the vendors tell us, attestation is not logging.
Right.
uh, right. So the next thing that we can do is look into that fidelity. Is the fidelity deviating, right? So what that means is you will hear a lot of concepts about intent based authorization or behavior based authorization, and that is where the future is, and it will continue to go that way. So basically, you have your intent, which is what it was supposed to do, and then you have your behavior, and then you have this uncertainty principle. All these three things will actually help you secure your agentic AI.
Yeah.
And then there
Yeah.
is definitely another portion of it, your IGA, your PAM,
Yeah.
another your just in time,
Yeah.
your authorization layer. Those concepts are pretty mature right now, and they will continue to mature as we go along.
And I love your answer. I mean, I love the aspect of intent based authorization, right? You know, and now as somebody who works at a vendor, right, where we are, we're taking our stance on how to do security of these agents, right, and how to help organizations solve this problem for people, right? It brings about I think, an interesting twist to how we as a security industry have reacted to security trends over the years, right? And just a little bit on based on my own background, like I mentioned earlier, I came from the cloud security side of the world, and just like a lot of traditional security, although back 15 years ago we didn't call it traditional security because the cloud was a new thing back then, right? But we took a I would say a very traditional approach, which is like we put discovery of issues ahead of controlling and management of those issues, right? And that's a very typical sort of reaction to these security trends and these new technologies as they come out, right? Discover, control, right? Does
100%,
does that
100%.
does that work in the AI world though? When there's uncertainty, right? Then I think this is kind of the where we'll segue into, some of your other topics, right? But does that still work, or do we kind of flip it around a little bit, do some control first, and then do some discovery, or talk to me a little bit about your thoughts around that part of the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. So, exactly as you said, it's a new way of thinking, honestly,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So, when we went from data center to cloud, people who wanted to do role based access control in the same manner,
yeah.
that didn't work
Yeah,
out so well in the cloud.
yeah,
But most
yeah.
importantly, what's the number one problem the people who have in their workloads in the data center face? It's the discovery part of it, right?
Yeah,
It
yeah.
is the easiest thing to solve in cloud,
Right,
right? I can tell you
right,
exactly
right,
how
right.
many
Yeah,
workloads are
yeah,
running, how many service
yeah.
accounts are.
Exactly,
So, see,
exactly.
two different words, the biggest problem just became,
Right,
oh,
right,
I
right.
know this, it is in cloud, right? So this is
Yeah,
the
yeah,
same
yeah.
thing with agentic AI as well. We think differently about it. Some of the concepts will still hold, like it is still an identity, it will still need an identifier. It will, bring up, I don't know if you want to call it joiner, mover, lever or something else, but
Mhm,
it will be
mhm,
brought in the word, or it will start living, and then it will do its work, and at some point it will die. So those things will continue to happen, and we just have to be smart about it. So say for example, an OAuth token that is uh, valid for you for an hour, that's fine. For a human, 1 hour OAuth token makes absolute sense, but agents can do a lot of these things within an hour, and that is where the uncertainty principle comes in. Let's say your agent is making 20 decisions per second, John, right?
mhm,
An agent can
mhm.
do it.
Right.
So imagine how many decisions can it take in an hour. So let's say by the time it is on 500th decision, right? It could have transformed into something else. It was very different from what it
Yep.
started. So by the minute five, you will have an agent that is very different from the agent that you had when your token lifetime started. This is what uncertainty brings in. You do
Right.
not know anymore that the agent that you started with and the agent that you have is at minute
Yeah.
five are the same agents. And then you have
Yeah.
55 more minutes before that
Yeah.
token expires and it has to re authenticate. So the token lifetime could be very different from a human user versus an agent because they operate at a different speed. And that is why you hear a lot of these things about runtime authorization. But this
Mhm.
runtime authorization also has to be at machine speed, and it has to bring in intent and behavior to understand the fidelity of the agent.
Right. I love that. So for our next like topics here, I do want to hit up um the aspect of organizations being stuck in Gen 1 problems, right? And certainly I've seen that in my past experiences too, right? We joked a little bit earlier before the podcast, right? That I've seen where organizations even to this day are fighting Gen 1 cloud security problems, right? After all of this time, after all of this preaching that we've done, they're still fighting some of those problems, right? Um, does agents and agentic security break that? Does it reinforce that? Talk to us a little bit, about um, the your aspect. I think you've called it. Maybe I'm getting it wrong, so correct me, please. But like the tool hopping tango, and and process purgatory, So, but it's all like under the same kind of realm from what I've been reading your stuff, right? Where it's like organizations are on Gen 1 problems, those of us on the vendor side are solving Gen 3 problems, but does, just like we've talked about AI agents, now living in an authorization scoped world where things happen in 5 minutes versus 1 hour, right? Um, you know, does that leapfrog? Does it speed it up? Does it, it's how does that work, Rohit? Guide us.
Yeah. I don't know if I would be able to guide you, but we can obviously talk it through, John.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. Let's talk it through.
And
Let's go.
yeah. And I don't know if your listeners found out by my accent so far or not, but I grew up watching a lot of Bollywood movies, John. So I have this penchant for drama, right? That is why
All good.
I
All
write
good.
these
I love it.
I write these serious papers on
uh,
serious stuff, but I call it
uh,
something, very fancy and very dramatic and stuff like that.
I
So
love it.
tool hopping tango and process purgatory is that part of Bollywood that lives within me. But
Love it.
it's a great point, and I have a lot of respect for the vendors, not just out of the goodness of my heart, but
Uh-huh.
also because vendors who are the one who are investing in this industry to take us forward. Right? If there was no vendors, there was not going to be any shared service framework or no conditional access evaluation profile or maybe no just in time or zero standing privileges. So vendors are actually driving this industry forward. So I have a lot of respect for them. Vendors, when they evangelize a term, and you are an evangelist, John, so you
Yep.
know this. When you evangelize a term, then my bosses hear about it, and then they are ready to give me money and fund my program
Yeah.
because of that.
Yep.
So I have a lot of respect for that. But then also at the same, identity leaders are always in this chaos where vendors are also telling us, like, you and I know zero standing privileges is the future, right? Or if it is not the present, it has to be the future, right? But I also understand that not everything can be zero standing privileges, that you understand
Hmm.
as well. But
Yeah.
I'm also
Yep.
struggling, or the companies are also struggling with vaulting their current accounts. The companies are still struggling with orphaned accounts. Companies are still struggling with role based access control, the same things
Yeah.
that they were struggling with in 2008.
Yep.
So there is a disconnect between vendors and the ground realities sometimes, and it
Hmm.
is not a bad thing, but it makes sometimes an identity leader's job hard, because then we hear things like turn on zero standing privileges, and I'm like, there is no button there, right? So so yeah, so that's good thing. I other thing that and it's not on all on the vendor side as well, I also blame identity leaders for it as well. And this is something that I feel strongly. This is called tool hopping tango, right?
Hmm.
In which it's easier for me to not mature the processes, but
Hmm.
migrate to a different tool. Right. So if I migrate from tool A to tool B, it is
Hmm.
possibly going to take 3 years or 2 years or whatever. And then all my KPIs would look green. Migration is green at 40%. But what is it
Right.
getting behind the scenes? Nothing.
Yeah.
And I've seen too many identity, or at least a few identity and business and tech leaders guilty of this tool hopping tango. Like they get into migration, they move on while the migration is happening. Everything was green when they were here, but the organization achieved nothing. So this is tool hopping tango. And then process purgatory is, sometimes the process itself becomes the defining factor, and then the objective is lost. Right.
Right.
So
Right.
how many roles do you have in the ecosystem becomes a KPI. It doesn't matter if your roles are over provisioned or under provisioned. So that is a thing that we have to be very cautious about.
Right. So yeah, that I thank you for that. I love that. I really like. And by the way, I'm here for the Bollywood explanation of things hard security topics. I love it. Absolutely love it. Um, but you're right. It's like as you talk to business leaders about these concepts that we come up with, right? It's just like, but as an ex practitioner myself, right? It's like I understand that it's not a switch, right? It's not a switch you could just move to day one, right? There's a path to get there, right? Um, but from your perspective, right? How do you explain to these leaders that hey, these concepts are real concepts, they're real security concepts, meaning like and you talked about this a little bit, but if you could expand on it, right? How do you explain these hard security concepts as values to leadership that we need to strive to? And so that's the easy part of the question, right? But the hard part of the question is then I'm sure they're going to be asking you the follow up, right? Which is like, okay, Rohit, well, now give us the roadmap to get there. Since we're going to invest in this thing that you told me to go invest in. How do you take us there? Right. So it's a loaded question, but walk us through it, please.
But it's an excellent question, right? And honestly, that is the job, right? That is the
Mm-hmm.
job, and that is why I said, first, trust is not built during the crisis.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to go out and make these relationships yourself. You have to stay on top of your own game, so learning and relationship. should be like a key component of your job, as much as it should take 10 to 20 or 30% of your time when you are creating this relationship and also upskilling yourself, which sometimes take the back seat because there is always a P1 or a P2 or a P3, right? So John, if you respect my knowledge enough and if you like me, if both these conditions are true,
Hmm.
you will potentially
Hmm.
hear what I'm
Yeah.
going to tell you without dismissing it. Now, if either of those two things were not true, if you didn't like me, or if I don't know what I was talking about, you would probably dismiss a novel idea that I come up with, right?
Right.
So on
Right.
their trust and be educated. That's number one. Number two, what you do is communication is that art. Like everybody tells this, like, you have to break it down from the technical terms to the business terms and stuff like that.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
it's it's not science, it is an art. It's
Yeah.
easier said
Yeah.
than done, but you have to practice about it. And how you practice is by, you reach out from the bottom rung or the organization. You don't go to the top and start saying zero standing privileges.
Right.
You have
Right.
to create that community. People have their trusted advisors who are maybe very technical in nature, and you have to earn the trust of your those advisors and help them understand it. So that is an art in itself, right? uh, of how do you communicate these topics, and how do you communicate these topics is by speaking in the language that they speak. So if they are worried about how many clients are logging into the application, how many clients are leaving midway during the MFA process and stuff like that, and that is how you try to communicate. So first understand their
Yeah.
language, right? So it's easier said than,
Yeah.
you know don't talk in terms of technology, talk in terms of business. But business is no language. Speak in the language that they hear every day. If they are hearing client authentication, or maybe not client authentication, but if they are hearing about the reach of marketing or how CRM works or stuff like that, speak in that language and they will understand you. And regarding the roadmap as well, I think it has to start with inventory first, right? You cannot control what you cannot see. So start with
Hmm.
an inventory, break it down, and most importantly, show them small wins, right? Don't have
Hmm.
a big bang approach of the win is going to
Right.
come 2 years down the
Right.
line. When you have big wins along the way, then it happens with two things. A, you have the time to mature your roadmap, because your roadmap is
Hmm.
fluid, and you continue to earn their trust and hopefully dollars along the way as well. So two or three things. And it really depends upon exact use case, but as the guiding principles, this would really help anybody out.
And absolutely, and that's I was going to say that's exactly where that trust building comes in, right? For sure.
Mhm. Yeah, John,
Um,
I do have a
yeah,
question for you, though, right? You have
yeah,
been asking
yeah,
me so many questions.
yeah,
What's the
absolutely.
difference between an influencer and an evangelist?
I think an influencer it's scope. I think in my view, right? it's
Yeah.
uh it's an influencer strives to have the million followers on YouTube, right? Or
Mhm.
whatever social media platform, whereas an evangelist, I'm here to number one, talk about my company solutions, right? Of course, right? They pay me to do this, but also use everything I learned either over the years, right, or having great conversations with somebody like you, right. I'm learning today, right, using that and to formulate kind of my thoughts and my message, right. At the end of the day, it's being a messenger, right. At the end of the day, right, it's being able to talk. If
Exactly.
you ask my dad, though, if you ask my dad, who's also a talker, by the
Mhm.
way, it's you have to have the, like, the gift that you and I have, which is the gift of gab, being able
Mhm.
to talk, right? If you ask my dad,
Absolutely.
it's the dream job, just talking.
Oh,
I think
that's
that's in my
funny.
view. That's the difference. That's the difference,
No,
right?
that's very insightful and definitely looks rehearsed. But to anybody listening or watching, this was not rehearsed. I was just trying to put John on the spot because not that I'm calling you old John, but I always felt like influencers are young people and evangelists are like not so young people. But you
There is that
explained it
too.
well.
There is that too. Although, my daughter and several times has tried to turn me into an influencer in certain things, but great question. I love that question. I hadn't thought about it that way, so that's good. um, Now let's switch a little bit. Early retirement jar. What's the most in your view? What's the most overused acronym that goes into the early retirement jar?
Uh, Dude, that's interesting. I will call NHI, right? And I have
NHI.
so much respect for it because I think this
Uh-huh.
is the cornerstone of security. I
Uh,
really believe this is for the future because agents are
yeah.
type of NHI. But I
Yeah.
told you earlier, right? Like we have drawn the circle around humans and everything outside is
Yeah.
non-human. This just
Yeah.
makes my job impossible because that undefined universe needs to be secured. So
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
non-human identity, but again,
Yeah.
I think this is very important. I think these conversations are very timely, but just something that terms that I never felt in love with.
Right. Right. Next one along the same lines. What is the one accepted industry best practice that we still do that should be put to rest and no longer used anymore?
User access reviews, right? Uh, it's time for standing privileges to be minimized aggressively.
Right.
It's time for us
Right.
to go towards just in time and zero standing privileges. It will not happen in 100% of the cases.
All right. And here's the future prediction question for Rohit. Where do you see agentic access in 3 years?
I think it would be part of the fabric of everything that we do, right? Business are POCing and piloting right now. Some workloads are running into production. And as we are maturing, we are creating that scaffolding along the way, right? So people like me are getting ready with everything that is needed to reasonably secure agents. I think
Mhm.
within the next year, year and a half, we will be there and actual production workloads would be running. So I think in the next 3 years, agents would be in the very fabric of the way
Mhm.
that we do work, very much like computers are today for
Yep.
us.
It'd be natural part of us.
100%.
All right. So last question in this quick hit part of the episode. When you're talking to your peers at roundtables, industry roundtables, your industry peers, right? And they secretly come to you with, like concerns about what we're going through in the industry. How do you advise your peers, especially with AI,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I completely forgot that you called this a rapid fire, John. I'll tell you something personal. My wife tells me that I'm the worst rapid fire player ever because I love talking so much. I can never answer in one word. Like I have to
Love it.
create and weave a story and things like this. So sorry for
Love it.
messing up your rapid fire.
Yep.
But yeah, I
All good.
mean, uh, I have a very generic piece of advice to all the peers that come up to
Mhm.
me, right? Like we have to learn, right? Like we have to forget everything that we have learned so far and we have to relearn and get in the habit of forgetting and relearning at a much faster rate. Fortunately for us or people like me, John, we are blessed because we are in an industry that is based upon first principle, right? So let's say if I was a developer, I could have written the code and could have never understood how Kubernetes really works behind
Mhm.
the scenes, right?
Right.
I could have deployed my code and everything, that's fine, but I could not, I would have survived without understanding it, right? But in identity, if I want to understand anything, I can understand that. That is what I talk on my podcast as well. Like if I want to understand token, I can understand everything in it. It's really just a file, right? What can a file contain? It can contain your name and your identifier, and those are attributes. So I feel like learning for us is so much simpler, especially now with AI, right?
Mhm.
That everything can be broken down into first principles. So just continue learning, be adaptable, and then there are controllables and uncontrollables in life, John.
Mhm.
There are some things that
Yep.
are out of our control, and you can either stress about it or it is what
Yep.
it is.
Right. Right. Very insightful. Thank you, Rohit. So where can folks find you? I know you have we talked about the Identity Navigator podcast, but tell us about where we can find you and we could hear more and read more from Rohit.
Yeah, absolutely. You can always reach out to me via the podcast. It's called the Identity Navigator. I'm very active on LinkedIn as well. So anybody can reach out to me on LinkedIn. The email with the navigator is theidentitynavigator@gmail.com. I'm normally very responsive on that email as well. Always happy to nerd out. I always have these bold ideas and I'm never afraid of being corrected because that's how I learn. So, reach out to me via any social media platform. I would be there. So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to hear the feedback from your listeners, John.
Awesome. And that's it, everybody. Thank you for watching today's episode of the Grounds for Access podcast. Please, like a lot of these podcasts, we definitely would ask that you like this episode. So click the like button down there and you subscribe to our channels so you can continue following us. wherever those channels are, YouTube, Spotify, etc. We absolutely appreciate that, and we thank you. And I've also finished my drink that's in the cup. I don't know if you have any more coconut water left in your cup, but I don't have any more coffee left in my cup.
I have a couple of sips, John, but I'm just very grateful that I did not choke or say I had taken a wrong sip and embarrassed myself on your podcast. So I will take that as a win.
We would have used that for something anyways, though. but that's I'm glad you didn't choke either. So thank you.
Mm.
And thank you, Rohit. I totally appreciate you being on our podcast episode today for Grounds for Access. So again, thank you. Any parting words that you have for us?
Yes, it was a pleasure being here, John, and I wish you a lot of success in all the evangelizing that you are doing and with this new podcast of yours.
Thank you, Rohit. All right, that's it. Thank you, everybody. We appreciate you. See you next time. Bye.